Does the division have a rule on that? I know that years ago.
No, it doesn't have a rule. Doesn't have a rule on items other than what I just said.
Mhm.
Um,
The reason I ask is I know a number of years ago, um, and I'm talking probably 15 or more. Um, I remember dealing with that subject. Why don't we reserve for the replacement of the building itself? Um, at some point, any building is going to have to be, significantly redone. Whether and that was getting mainly to the issue with concrete replacement, spalling, and all of the issues that come with that. And I remember being told at some point from somebody at the division, I thought that that we don't have to reserve for the replacement of the building. We don't have to reserve for the reconstruction of the building. Um, and I could never figure out why that was, and it sounds like maybe it was wrong, but um,
well, I don't know. I'm not. I don't think concrete is necessarily the same thing as replacement of the building. I just think we've learned through the years that concrete is something. Again, it's more on the ocean, not completely. It just I think it's an item of deferred maintenance. Same thing with like pipes, right? I mean,
yes, and that's
uh,
that's where I was going too.
oftentimes the pipes are forgotten
Right.
because they're just there. I have a lot of associations now, several anyway, that are dealing with, again, these are the same kind of things, 30, 40-year old plus buildings. And it's especially if they have, cast iron or whatever, they deteriorate, rust out, need to be replaced. That's another, you know, huge item that oftentimes just maybe just because it's just not obvious, like painting, paving, roof, cooling tower, elevators. It kind of gets forgotten. I mean, that's not a great legal answer, but I just think it's reality that it kind of people take it for granted. Oh, the pipes, the pipes work or whatever. They just don't think about it. Same thing with the concrete. I think something that just not thought about as a distinct separate item. Um, Even electrical.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of places reserve for that, even though those components go. Fire panels, I think there are things I think that just for whatever reason aren't focused on, which is why I guess it is helpful to have an engineer or someone do a reserve study
Right.
to pick up items that quite frankly the board won't think about,
Well,
but need to be thought about.
and I think that's why I've always encouraged that kind of thing to be done by a engineer, because frankly, when you look at these items and you start it, even reserve studies, typically the reserve studies done by non-engineers, they base it on what normally is done, and like you said, I think consider they don't always consider things like the pipes and whether they were, whether they have to be replaced, whether they were copper, whether they were, what they're built with, and whether they're the right size. That's the other thing. Over a period of time, some of some of these buildings, they can't, with all of the new things that are out there in terms of water and sinks and dishwashers and all of these things that have been added, they require a lot more water pressure, um, and so I think it does get, I think it gets missed. And I think that's why I've always said, I, it's one thing to waive reserves if you know how much you're waiving, but when you don't know what you're waiving, it's much, much more difficult. And like I said, I look at a lot of, and I know you do too, Peter. I look a lot of budgets. I very seldom see things in there for major plumbing. I mean, there'll be plumbing, but very seldom major plumbing, replacement of pipes and things like that. You don't see it for building replacement, significant building replacement. A lot of these items were never in the budget because they thought they were taking care of them as they went, and now they're doing major balcony replacements, major. stack replacements, all that, the vents and things that have to be, things that have to be vented, all of those kind of things just tend to get forgotten because they were done in the original building and people just assume they're always going to be there. But maintenance on them is a major thing. So I you know, I just encourage you, if you're looking at your budgets now, if anything good can come out of this whole thing, it's at least maybe people will look at what they're actually doing from a budget standpoint and what they're forgetting about. And I'm not going to leave homeowners associations out of there. You need to find out what you're responsible for in street repair, and find out what paving actually means, and find out how much of that, when you do that, is going to also involve replacing storm sewers, eliminating and replacing baffles and things like that we don't think about, and can take a job that maybe you thought was a $20,000 or $50,000 asphalt job and turn it into a $250,000 street repair. So I think it's important to look at those kind of things and take that into consideration. We have a caller.
I will be.
We have a caller.
Oh,
we'll go. Edna, go ahead.
We have a 10-story concrete condo on the water. The previous board did a study by an engineering company to look at the concrete delamination and spalling. The current board refuses to post this study to the website. What can be done to get this posted? And they have posted other studies that we had done back in 2015, but this study was done in 2019.
Well, I don't think you can force them to post it. It's not one of the items. I think you can definitely get a copy of it because it is part of your official records. And then if you want to, send it to all the owners yourself, or you're free to do that. But I'm not sure you can force them to post it.
I would say, Ed, a couple things. One, I understand what Peter's saying, and I agree with that. From a practical standpoint, there's probably nothing that can make them post it. I'll make a couple suggestions. They are supposed to have financial statements available, and those financial statements should disclose any kind of issue that's there relative to issues with the structural integrity of the building and potential future special assessments to cover that. All right. So I think you can encourage the board to put the financial statements there and make sure that the auditor that's doing the audit of your financial statements is aware that there's a report out there. The second thing that I would say, and that's probably more of a thing that you can probably do. The second thing is something that I think can get them to do it, and that is that I would, if something happens in that building and somebody dies as a result of that, and the board knew that and wouldn't disclose it, I think you're looking now. Maybe this might not have been true in the Champlain issue, but with that happening, I think you're looking at gross negligence at that point. And I think that the board members could open themselves up to personal liability. Whether that'll be successful or not, I don't know. But if I'm on a board, I'm disclosing everything that's out there on that building, because if I hide it, somebody buys, and something happens, okay, or even one of my existing members that something happens, I can tell you right away who my second call is going to be to, and that's a personal injury attorney who's going to file a class action suit. I think that board members need to wise up and stop worrying about it. They need to disclose and be transparent, or they're going to start taking liability for some of these issues. And trust me, Champlain's already dealing with some of that to some degree, because they had financial information about. They had structural information that they were, acting on, and so that was not public. So I don't know, Peter. I may be taking a really hard line on this, but I think we're moving into that area where if a board is hiding that information or not making it readily available, keeping it from an owner, I think you're opening yourself up to some liability at that point.
Well, okay. I think it all depends on the facts. When you say hiding it, clearly if obviously it is an official record, and as an official record, they must make it available to any owner who asks for it, unless, it was done in anticipation of a lawsuit, and maybe it's work product privilege. But that aside,
it wasn't.
I'm saying, but it's not. So that's an official record, and any owner can get it. And if they don't give it up, obviously, anyone can sue for it and then get their attorney's fees when they're successful enforcing the board to produce it. Whether or not there is liability, that's really, I'm not going to. That really depends upon the circumstances of, what did the report say? When did they know? And, is someone asking about it? So I'm not going to guess on that issue. Generally speaking, it's difficult to hold board members personally liable, monetarily liable, unless they're acting in bad faith or with kickbacks, or fraudulent, and things like that. Post Champlain, we'll see. That standard may change. But going to end this specific question, since the board, for whatever reason, it doesn't feel compelled to post it, I just get it from them, and then you can on your own furnish it to everybody.
Yeah, I think that the problem is Edna knows one exists. I think sometimes people don't even know that the board has done that.
Right.
They haven't even disclosed that.
Well, see, we're right. See, I don't know what's going to happen, and it'd be very interesting to see what's going to happen with the legislature coming up this year in terms of, again, the post Champlain world,
right?
In terms of reserves, reserve disclosures, engineering reports, what you just said about posting, requirements to get engineering reports. I think that the landscape is going to change. How much we don't know yet. Now you're saying that that the board gets a report and the report is bad, right? Do they then have a duty to disclose it to everyone? We'll see. We'll see.
I tell you, one of the things that I saw happen a long time ago, and I would wonder what would happen today, but I was in an association where they were dealing with a couple things. One, they didn't want to put their insurance in their budget because the number was too large. So they didn't want it in the budget.
Oh, so they special assess for it every year?
So they special assess for it every year, which is
a lot of associations do that.
Yeah, but it's you're not allowed to special assess for an operating expenditure. That's the problem.
I'm not saying it's right.
No, I know. So that was kind of difficult because I was trying to explain to them at a board meeting that you have to, you got to disclose this kind of thing. Because what they were doing is they disclose it after because prices were going up pretty steadily then. They would disclose it after. I mean, they would actually do the special assessment after the end of the year, sometime 4 months into the new year, so that it wasn't in the annual report and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of got me. And then I had one association where the president of the association and one of the board members worked for a large real estate company that sold a lot of property on the ocean. And they had a unit in there, and they purposely wouldn't put certain things in the budget and disclose certain things, including a couple of special assessments that were coming up, because they wanted to be able to sell their unit before that became public. And that's the kind of stuff that's happened in the past. And that's the kind of stuff that in the future, I think that the treatment of that is going to be a whole lot different than it was in the past. And in both cases, it's illegal, but to do those kind of things. But I think we've got to look at that because like I say, in the past, there were people getting away with that. And if you've gotten a monetary gain from not disclosing financial information that was and building information that's critical, I think you've got some liability at that point. Well,
that has some liability potential because now you have self-dealing going.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So anytime you're doing something
board.
Do what?
We do have two realtors on the board.
Oh, do you? Well, hopefully, this was years ago, so maybe it's not even if it is the same one, maybe it's not the same realtors. But anyway, it was a problem. So, and I have also had a situation. I'll just mention this, and I've told board members this. If at the annual meeting, first of all, the president doesn't necessarily need to be the person running that meeting, although many times they believe that they do. But at that annual meeting, if if the president steps up and says, "We're definitely looking at a special assessment coming up," and they say that kind of thing, um, and and they start talking about why. But even if they just say that we're looking at a special, you're looking at a disclosure issue for your financial statements. When the president stands up in an official capacity and says we're looking at a special assessment, that's something that needs to be disclosed then in the financials. It's another thing if that's just been a discussion in, relative to some things in a meeting and never became part of the official record, never became it was just some discussion. We're looking at this, we're doing this, we're concerned about this, whatever. That's not a problem. But when somebody gets up and says, at an annual meeting in an official capacity on a kind of a report on the association, gets up and makes that comment, you probably got some issues with that in terms of disclosure. So the one thing I would encourage associations is that be transparent. I mean, other places, private enterprises, they got to be careful about what they say. They got to be less transparent in a private business because you can give away competitive advantage. But in a homeowners association or a condo association, there's no reason to hide facts. Doesn't mean you need to make speculation like the president that gets up and says we're going to have a special assessment just to scare people into approving the budget or whatever. But you do have to, you should disclose stuff. If you have a question, disclose it in your financials. So at least so that, it's out there and it's on the record that here it is, because first of all, most people don't read it. So if you're worried, they're probably never reading the financial statements, especially if it's in the numbers portion. But also, it's just out there. You can point to and say, look, we were very transparent. Our financial statements even make reference in Note E to, such and such. And that helps you as a board member get off of the liability issue, because they are going to be looking. If this happens again, after happening, just recently, you're going to be people out there searching for liability at that case, and you're going to have courts that are going to be searching for people to hold responsible, even though technically that's not their job. But you'll see that. So, I just caution board members. Let's going forward, learn a lesson, be transparent. Make sure you're looking at this stuff and just not randomly waiving stuff year after year without ever looking at what you're waiving. So that's just my soapbox. I'll get off now. Sorry, Peter. Anyway,
Right.
Edna, is that's a good question. Do you have a follow-up on that, or are you good?
Nope, that was it for today.
That's a good question. Appreciate it. I appreciate you offering that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. So, I know, Peter, since we're on that topic, I think that is a good, a good question. Where do you go at this point? What do you have to do at this point? How far, what are you've got the tougher job, because I can sit here and pontificate, and I'm not an attorney, so I don't have to give an opinion on anything. They just can say, oh, that's the accountant. I don't have to listen to him. But in your situation, I know it puts you in a tougher spot, because this stuff is not very clear cut going forward right now, and we're still waiting for statute to come out and all that kind of stuff. So what have kind of?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of disclosure, right now the law, like with the estoppel certificate, you have to disclose. It's not things like you don't have to disclose assessments that you're thinking about or that you might be thinking about. There's no requirement right now to disclose building condition, things like that. At least not in the estoppel. Again, these things may change going forward. You do have to disclose, what's the outstanding, what are the assessments coming due, but only like in the next 30 to 35 days, depending on how the estoppel is issued. Now, if they ask other questions beyond the estoppel, the association can answer those, and obviously they should answer those honestly and openly and transparently. But the actual, again, I think that the disclosure things may change, but under current law, it's still relatively limited. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, and that's I know from our standpoint, from a CPA standpoint, I know from our CIRA committee for the state committee, there's real concern. We have real concern right now from a liability standpoint that we're going to, because we're one of a couple, 2, 3 parties that might have deep pockets. Like you said, it's hard to get to. It is hard to get to the, to the board members. It's hard to get to them personally. You can, get to the association maybe, and the board acting on behalf of the association. You might be able to get that situation, but a gross negligence situation to be able to pierce through to the individual officers or board members is more difficult, especially board members, and that is, that's something there. But you got potentially auditors, not if you have audited financial statements, even though we're not engineers and we don't take responsibility for the reserve information. There are some that want us to, which we can't. I mean, you'd have to have a reserve study done every year at that point for us to be even able to probably point to that and give some sort of an opinion on it. But
I think right now, again, this may change. I think right now the burden still is on the buyer, quite frankly, to ask the right questions as opposed to the association. I mean, it's burden on the association, but I think post-Champlain buyers are now much more aware of this happened, and will it happen again, and to find out, do you have an engineering report? When was the last time you had concrete work done? What are your reserves? Things like that.
It's funny though with this market and the fact that we're still. I had a situation recently on a client that they had the exact problem we're talking about. They were going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, already had spent some, significant spalling damage, oceanfront condo, built in the 70s, so it was it was a classic. And yet the seller wouldn't move off of, wasn't going to move off of their price by even $10,000. I mean, it was I think a $600,000 asking price, and wouldn't come down to 540 or 550 or even 560. They weren't coming off of that number at all, even though the last budget analysis showed that there was going to be a special assessment for additional spalling damage that they had not anticipated. And there was minute commentary that they didn't know if that was going to be the extent of it. So I'm amazed that people still aren't paying attention, that some people aren't paying attention to that stuff. The other thing that always amazes me, and I get involved in purchasing real estate, not even just for myself, I help my clients sometimes with activity, and I'll see, there's a requirement that you're provided with certain financial documents from the association. In fact, it actually allows you to get out of your contract if you don't have that information. But I see people sign off that they have that information, and they don't. They have the documents. A lot of people go to the trouble of at least requesting the documents, but you're also supposed to have the financial statements. You're supposed to have the budget information available. and you're supposed to have the financial statements. And almost never do you get that unless you ask for it again. It's almost never posted. I never see a copy of the financial statements, the audited financial statements, ever posted. I will see stuff internal that they call financial statements, but aren't even close, don't have any disclosures, don't have any, many times it's just not even legitimate financials. But you can't, nothing that is a formal audit report or anything like that. and it gets signed off on. People sign off on it and they go ahead and close, and without any disclosure. And that's a situation where if you had the right to it and you didn't ask for it, I think as a buyer, you've assumed that responsibility. I agree with you. I think the realtors have some liability potentially in that situation if they didn't help their buyer, especially if their buyer was out of state. They didn't help their buyer with obtaining that information, and it turns out that their buyer now has a big special assessment or something. I think I think what's happened with Champlain is we've created a lot of liability for professionals. I'm not sure yet we've created a lot of liability for associations, but I think we've created a lot of liability for professionals. I think the CPAs are going to be a target at some point because many of us have insurance and deep pockets. And I think the realtors are potentially going to be, potentially looked at, particularly since legally the commission that's paid is paid from the seller. So if you're a realtor and you were primarily representing the buyer, and you found the property for the buyer, you're getting paid by the seller, and you didn't disclose or obtain for your buyer the information that they needed to determine whether or not financially they should have done this. I think we're opening ourselves up to some liability in the real estate side of the transaction. So, and a lot of realtors are not really familiar with the financial information. They're familiar with the documents at this point, but they're not completely familiar with the financial statements, where to look at them, what they say, what they don't say, and and the internal documents, the budget, the reserve analysis, those kind of things. So anyway, that's just my assessment of where we're at right now, and I think that's going to be. I think you're right, Peter. It's going to be hard to get the board members right away. But again, if you're a board member, that there's a serious problem with something that's exactly the same as caused a collapse of a building in South Florida. I think you've got to look real hard at whether or not, if you're not disclosing to your members, to your unit owners, that you have that report and that it's available for review. Yeah, I think you're potentially I think you potentially got some issues. That's just.
I mean, you may be right, only because oftentimes the facts and circumstances will lend itself, to a jury finding someone to be at fault.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. They don't want to ever walk away and say it was nobody's fault. Right.
Right. So, when you have a set of circumstances like that, had a report, didn't disclose it, something horrible happened, people were seriously injured or killed, the jury's going to go, okay, this all adds up to liability. So, I could easily see that. We'll see. So,
I mean,
anytime you have facts that they add up and it looks like they're someone looking for someone to blame, and as you say, with a deep pocket like an association with their liability insurance and those kind of things, will be individual liability for board members. I don't know, depends, but yeah, I mean, if you have a set of facts like that, I could easily see a liability being found.
Yeah, and you can see how fast with Champlain you can see how fast you can blow through maximum coverages on stuff. That's another thing. Associations have, and the board has an obligation to insure. Make sure the association is adequately insured. But nobody really thinks about something like this and considers it, and so all of a sudden, board members are looking at insurance and the insurance agent saying, well, if you're willing to cap your liability at $50 million or $20 million or whatever, we'll, we can reduce your premium cost by 20% or 15% or whatever. And that becomes something that gets looked at, and over the years gets just worked into the insurance. All of a sudden I'll just mention that, Rick Carroll's a sponsor, so want to be clear about that. But even though that he's a sponsor, it's you need to have somebody doing your insurance in this area that actually does this kind of insurance, because the issues we're talking about right now are not things that come up in your standard homeowners association policy. This isn't something that you get in your property damage coverage on your house. There's issues there on coverages and different types of coverages that, because these entities are also quasi-commercial in terms of operation, they've got other issues and other liabilities that you don't have personally. And like board member coverage and D&O and things like that you need somebody who understands the risks of the situation, and also understands where there is no risk, and where you shouldn't be paying for it. So, doubling up on coverages and things. So that's just, something also is going to need to be looked at, because they're going to be professionals brought into play, and people are going to look at board members and say, well, you don't have adequate insurance because you didn't do your job insuring the association. So, so that's not our fault. That's the association's fault, and maybe the board member's fault for, purposely not doing that correctly. So anyway, I think we're going to be looking at some of these things coming up real hard, because there's going to be a lot of issues out there. And I think, if it happens again, they're going to definitely be looking for somebody to pin it on, so to speak. They even tried to do this with Champlain. They have some, there were some media issues about, and I think that they were actually being fairly proactive. I doubt very seriously they were doing anything less than what other associations would have done. And I think they were doing more. They were actually preparing for this study 2 years in advance. They had already gotten some reports, looking at, knowing they were going to be doing this in 2 years. You don't normally anticipate, when you get a report, that yes, there's damage here and we're going to have to fix this. This is going to be something that's required, but it's a question of when it's going to be required. Is this going to be required immediately, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? And so some of that, it may be that it was disclosed that it was going to have to be done. The question was how rapidly. And they were already 2 years before the time they really even had to get the recertification. So you got to give them credit for that. They were at least on top of it. They weren't at least waiting until the final minute. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they're liable. I think that was just bad.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, that's it for today. We appreciate, Edna, appreciate your call. Peter, we always appreciate your wisdom. Thank you very much. And hopefully you'll be with us again next Monday right here on Condo Solutions, because we're here every Monday from 9 to 10 o'clock right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's Heritage Station.